Welcome. Thanks for showing up. This was a big deal for me. I haven't really talked about this other than like at some dinner parties. So since when I was a kid, I was kind of known as the vid kid. I wrote a weekly syndicated column, and it was I was the first regular reviewer of video games starting in 1982. Wrote lots of magazine articles and a book, and was on all kinds of TV shows. And this just will kind of quickly run through my experience of growing up in the video game industry in the 80s as the video game industry grew up. It's also, my other title was How I Turned Some Pecans into a 40-year video game career. So after the VidKid stuff as a kid, I have in my adult life worked on a ton of games, starting with Pitfall for Sega Genesis and SNES, moving all the way up through like the DS and Wii era, and even some PS3 games, and also in the mobile world have done a lot of games as producer and designer and a consulting producer and all kinds of titles. I'm going to do a shameless plug for this one game because I get free PTO on Friday and Monday if I like advertise this game. This is My Arcade Empire, which was an addictive 1980s mall arcade themed story-based idle game. It was an Apple Game of the Day. It's well received. There's a QR code, or you can go to the iOS or Android stores to download it. And this presentation is kind of a beta version, so thanks for being beta testers with me. My whole life, I think most everything from that era was saved, but in boxes that I've never really opened. Didn't even get to all of opening the boxes to come up with stuff for here. So before all that, I was really sick as a kid. I had terrible asthma, was in the hospital 30 plus times, spent lots of Christmases in the hospital. And I want to talk about this a little bit because this kind of explains how a 10-year-old starts writing a weekly column. I spent months at the National Jewish Hospital, Asthma and Immunology Research Hospital in Denver. This is it in 1978. I spent months there. I lived there, had meals there. It was also my elementary school. Things were bleak. I found this little form that they sent to my parents saying like how they should talk to me about death and what happens when people die. There's burial and cremation. So kind of bleak. It was my kindergarten, and they actually had school at the hospital itself, we would do field trips. My parents left me there because they had to do, they had work in Texas. So I kind of lived there alone, and we would do field trips. This one was with my dad came up to visit, and we went to Casa Bonita. And this is kind of my first review. And it was there, I think, that I played my first game, which was a arcade version of Night Driver, and I really liked it. It was a tough time, and when I got home, I had friends that, greeted me when I returned, and they sustained my time there with lots of letters and cards, and I have boxes of that stuff still saved. Then in elementary school, we had a chili supper that made we used to help raise money for the school, and there were prizes if you sold some. I had typing classes that my mom took me to. So when I got home, it was too late to go around the neighborhood because all the other kids had hit all the houses selling chili supper tickets. And this is kind of a weird key moment because she had to go to the bank before it closed. And I said, let me try and sell some at the bank. And I put on, and my dad said, put on a suit and impress them. So I put on a suit and went to the bank and sold the bank president like a ton of chili supper tickets. So I stopped going like door to door and just went business to business and went on TV for selling just a ton of chili supper tickets. I sold about $600 in today's money for chili supper. Chili, big deal in Texas. And then I, wrote thank you notes to all of the businesses. What that meant was, $1,600 in chili. In fact, it was, I sold so many that they ran out of chili and they had to go to the store and they bought out all the wolf chili and had to use that. So I had a good success with that. And I, at one point, wanted to be a cartoonist and wrote some comic strips and sent that and my dad was very much like, if you want anyone to take your comic strip, you gotta, you showed me how to, in the paper, find out who the editor was and their address, and I sent them examples, and they sent out a reporter and did this big article on cute kid wants to be a cartoonist, but they didn't take my comic strip. Weirdly, I was also a childhood pen pals with George Burns, who old actor. He was God before Morgan Freeman. I would write him letters and he would write back, and I sent him a letter with this article in it. And he responded that I misspelled the word weirdos, which was the name of my comic strip. I took that same model of going to businesses, and there was a local contest to raise money for the Abilene, Texas Mental Health Association, and the grand prize was a trip to Six Flags. And so I took that same model, and instead of going door to door and saying, give me 5 cents for every book I read, I just went to businesses, oil companies and banks and real estate companies, and got collected something like $5,000 for the Mental Health Association. They were able to start a suicide prevention line. I won the Texas Governor's Award for Outstanding Volunteer Service, got a letter from Reagan, and went to Austin, Texas, and Governor Connolly's wife gave me the award. Governor Connolly was, injured in the JFK assassination, to date all this a little bit. But all during this time, I just had really, really bad asthma. And they make nebulizers now that look like penguins and cute animals, but when I was a kid, it was a big tank like this. And it would take 45 minutes to have a treatment. And we lived in Abilene, Texas, and there were 3 television stations. We didn't have cable. It was the 70s. TV went off at midnight, and there was, I had to kind of be awake 2 times a night in the middle of the night. And I read everything that we had in the house, which was Consumer Reports magazines that we never threw away. like decades of them. We had a set of 1962 Compton encyclopedias, and I read those, and which, told me that JFK was still president. I read the newspaper, I read columns, I read decades worth of Reader's Digest and, some Charlie Brown books here and there. And Irma Bombeck, we had all of her books. She was a columnist for newspapers. So I, spent years reading consumer-focused, slightly humorous, short pieces and columns and newspaper-style writing for years. That's sort of what I read every night. So kind of trained for writing a newspaper column. In fact, in Reader's Digest, there were these ads at the time, and it would be for Atari. I don't think even in television advertised in Reader's Digest. And I would look at these, I would pore over these ads. And in fact, there was one particular one, this ad in particular, and I would go through all of these game names and try and imagine what possibly that game could look like. And whenever they showed an image of a game, I would try and figure out which game that was in this stack. And I just became obsessed with getting an Atari 2600. I asked my dad, and he said it's a waste of time and money. So I didn't get a game system from my parents. So I appealed to Santa, and the neighbors got an Atari 2600, but I didn't. My birthday is in January, so I was like, well, of course I'll get one for my birthday. But I didn't get one for my birthday, and I was, you can see my brave face and disappointment in this picture. So I realized I couldn't rely on Santa. My parents said no, so I was going to have to do it. We had 3 pecan trees in our backyard, and I picked up the pecans and shelled them, and then did what I did for chili supper tickets, did what I did for the Mental Health Association, and didn't sell them door to door, but sold them to businesses. And car dealerships in particular would buy lots of bags of shelled pecans. And I made like $300, and that was enough to buy an Atari 2600 and some games. Here's a picture of me when I got that Atari 2600. And the 3 games I got was Combat, Surround, and Superman, which I had been just salivating over getting Superman. Surround was on sale, and Combat came with the system. So I really liked Combat. I loved Surround, and oh my God, did I not like Superman. And it upset me pretty greatly that I had spent, at this point, I'm spending my own money. I knew how much work it took to, to buy a $40 game then. And I felt really stung by that purchase. There was one place in town that rented games, but they only had a handful of games. And once I was really sick, and my mom rented 2 games for me, Stampede and Chopper Command, and I was so excited to play them, and then it dawned on me they're kind of the same game. You go up and down and you do something you either are roping certain cattle or you're shooting different helicopters. It's the same game. And so that really influenced like my starting to look at games like why are certain games good? And if you look at the packaging here, you'll see that, the Activision games boxes did at least have an example of what the game would look like, but often you wouldn't know what the game was going to be. You just kind of had to pay your money. So I took my decade worth of reading Consumer Reports and my experience of trying to sell a comic strip and went to the local paper. And instead of writing them a letter and sending them a column, I approached it much more like a sales job. I wrote 4 to 6 sample columns. I counted in columns in the paper how many words were in a column, so I knew how many words to write. I wrote examples. I rented games, so I had a good variety of columns. I got letters of recommendation from my teacher, and then instead of just mailing it in, I just showed up. And I showed up in a suit, in this briefcase, and here's a picture of me pitching my column. They did a secret test. They took me that weekend to see Tron that was opening, and the entertainment editor took me to the movie, and then I didn't get dinner. They then took me to the newsroom and plopped me in front of a computer, and I had not used one before, and said, write a review of that movie. And they watched me write this review to kind of make sure that I don't know, my parents weren't really writing this column or something. So I wrote it, I made my deadline, and there was one. They were like, you've got 10 more minutes to finish this article. And I wrote the review. They took my column. And here is a picture of my first column that appeared in July 1982. It was first called The Video Beat. And, also I would say, like, my mom was really, she had taught English, high school English, so, days that I was sick, she was complaining about, Superman, she would say, write about it. Don't necessarily tell me. And it became a weekly column. I wrote it every week. And my dad was a regional director for the Texas Public Health Department and traveled a lot. And it was July, and so for the next month, I would go with him on road trips and do the exact same thing. I would just show up in a suit and now published articles and examples of columns, and would show up at the Odessa American States, the Odessa newspaper, and the San Angelo paper, and the Austin paper, and would just show up and meet the editor, and that's how I sold my column. I got it into 20 newspapers on my own, just selling it kind of like this. About a month in, I found a surprise perk, and that was on a Saturday. I woke up and Activision had sent me a prototype of Pitfall and a prototype of Megamania. And I can't tell you how elated I was. One, that I wasn't going to have to keep buying games, spending all the money I made just to buy games, or limiting what I could review to what I could rent. So that was great. And then the next month, in Magic, Bill Grubb, who was the CEO, called me, and I had written a review of a Magic game. They have a clipping service that finds it and sends it to them. So they tracked me down and called me, and Bill Grubb invited me out to see a Magic and meet with their designers. Weird times, because I went alone. I can't imagine that now. But my parents just sent me off, and I stayed at Bill Grubb's house and with his family for a weekend for 3 or 4 days. And, I had to take the big asthma machine with me, and but they sent me out, and I had this great little Magic vacation. It worked out really well. And, in those days, there was still a lot of talk about banning games and making games be only 18 plus, or making arcades, making them either illegal or illegal for kids to be in. And so Magic had proposed this press tour And I would go on it with Dennis Coble, who did these games down here. And we went for 10 days across the U.S. with Seattle and San Francisco and Chicago and New York. Did interviews with newspapers and magazines and a lot of radio stations and some local TV stations. And so here I am kind of 3 months in to my column, and I've got a steady slate of newspapers that are running my column, and I'm been to a Magic. I'm starting to get some free games, and I've done this U.S. tour. I took money that I got from that, and I bought a fancy electric typewriter to help me write columns, because of course I would use a typewriter for the next 20 years. So it cost a lot of money, and did use it for a while until I got a Commodore 64. There was a thing called the CES, and I missed the first one. It was twice a year. It's still around, but it's once a year now. It was twice a year then. It was June in Chicago, and in January was in Las Vegas, and the video game world revolved around CES. That's where companies introduced themselves, were brand new. They introduced their new games that they were going to come out with. It was imperative that I go. I went to the first one in June 1983 and showed up and couldn't get in because it was they didn't allow anyone under 18. And I got special approval from the head of the CES, and I brought examples of my article, and they had a meeting and they let me in. Part of the reason was video games were relegated to a side building. They weren't in the main building. It was a side building. It was video games and porn. So I had to promise to close my eyes as I walked in and only stay in this corner of it. And but it was at CES that I would meet all these famous people and famous game makers. Nolan Bushnell, who talked just an hour ago, and Howard Scott Warshaw, who I met. This is in Vegas, and this is him and his then wife. Would meet David Crane and the Kitchen Brothers and Steve Cartwright. And then, of course, all kinds of famous people are at booths and stuff. So Spock and Andre the Giant, whose hand fit all the way around my head. And Mr. T, who said, "Smart kid, huh?" And, I was very excited for Lee Majors at the time and RoboCop. Other people I met during all that time was, so many different people on different TV shows and things. At that first CES, there's no kids except me. And a reporter for the New York Times was covering the CES, just what companies are doing what. And he bumped into me, and he got his editor to say, just follow Rawson around. So for the rest of the show, this reporter followed me around, and also they brought in a photographer, and they took all these pictures of me and followed me as I went to each company. And they wrote an article, and it came out in the New York Times while we were still in Chicago. We were leaving the hotel and rushing back, trying to, get our stuffs and rush to the airport. And, the pre-cell phone days, the message light was blinking in the hotel. And my mom said, go call down, see what the message is. And they said, we're going to bring you these messages. And it was a stack of 20 messages. And we didn't know that the article had come out, but the article had come out that morning. And the messages were Good Morning America, The Today Show, CBS Morning News, different magazines. They all wanted me to go to New York, like right now. So I had a giant Pink Panther that some company gave me. It was taller than me. And we, instead of going back to Texas, flew first class to New York with this giant Pink Panther. And we went on I went on the CBS Morning News the next day. We went with the first message that we got, and they had beaten the Good Morning America by 2 minutes. So that's how we decided. This is me like that next day. And because of that, I got syndicated by Universal Press Syndicate. I was ecstatic. I read a lot of Dear Abby because I read all the columns, and Roger Ebert, and some of my favorite comic strips at the time. I include Foxtrot and Pearls Before Swine because they're great comics, though they came after my time. And they changed the name of my column from the Video Beat to Vid Kid, and then they syndicated it nationally. So then I was in all kinds of papers. I would still get all these prototypes. This picture is from the internet, but it looks like what I had, all these red label carts and Atari prototypes. It took over our house. I got all the systems and all the games. This is our living room, and our living room was just desks with different game systems and TVs and computers. And my dad built these bookcases, and it was just those are all video games there. Grateful they let me take over the house. The CES in Las Vegas was always in January and was always when my birthday was. So from 10 on, all my birthdays were in Vegas, but like 80s Vegas, which is a little more hardcore and seedier. Like at one party, I hung out with Douglas Adams. He was promoting his game with Infocom, and it was at Elvis's old mansion, and he was really drunk but was playing the piano. Epics one time found out that they had a booth where they had like kind of different era. They had like a bunch of 13-year-old girls dressed as like the girls from the music video, the Simply Irresistible video, and they were like the booth girls, and they found out it was my birthday, and they said, "We're gonna throw a party for you." And I went to this suite in their hotel, and it was all these girls from the booth. Different time, but that was like, I would have companies throw me parties and stuff in Vegas in the 80s. I was on a show called That's Incredible. It was on ABC. It was a while ago because that was the ABC logo that year. They came to Abilene, and it was all quiet and hush-hush, but I got all of my friends we rented out Chuck E. Cheese, and my friends got there. It was all free play, and they filmed everything. The paper took a picture of me watching the episode, and I was really nervous to see myself. Right around then, Doubleday published my book, Vid Kid's Book of Home Video Games, 1984. It's a collection of a lot of my columns. I was on the New Tech Times, which was a TV show in the first year of the Discovery Channel. And nobody had the Discovery Channel because of that. So nobody ever knows about this show. But it was a weekly show where they would talk about the latest in technology, and I would do game reviews for that show. I was on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. That was a crazy experience because they gave me money for me and a chaperone to fly there, but instead we spent that money on like a big A-Team like van that we rented, and the whole family went out did a big road trip from Texas to LA and was on the Tonight Show that morning, or that whole day. We were just in a hotel because they film at like 4 and I have to be there at 3, something like that. And there was a lot of nerves, I think, in our room, and my parents were like, you and your sister go down, just hang out in the lobby and, don't leave the hotel. And so we spent like an hour running up the down escalators and down the up escalators, and because we're kids still. And I got back and we're about time to leave to go to the Tonight Show, and I'm like, oh, I've got a terrible headache, I'm so tired. And my parents squabbled, why did you let him do that? Well, I thought you were watching him. So they gave me coffee, and I went on the show. And I emceed the event in which Nintendo introduced the NES in New York City. They did a test run before they went nationally, and the test run was just the New York City market in '85. And so October of that year, they had a press event. I spent the day with, these names you may have heard about from Nintendo, and Miyamoto spent the day showing me his Super Mario Brothers. I think it was done or mostly done. I loved the game and was really excited for it. In the months that followed, they would sometimes call, and we would have this conference call. It would be at weird times, like 6 a.m., and we would talk through a translator. So they were really weird calls where I would say something and then it would be translated, and then you'd wait and they would say something and it would be translated. So weird conversations. But they would ask, like, what do kids in America like in games? And, what did I think of this game that I saw at their event? And one thing that I did say was, I think that kids really like the sense of discovery, and they like to find things that are hidden in games and things that aren't, that you put in maybe, but sort of seem like they shouldn't be there. And I like to think that they took that advice. I think that became a bigger deal. But it was a cool time, and I knew that it was going to be really successful because I got a NES. It was a pre-production version, and games would only fit in the device if I also shoved in a piece of wood. But all my friends from the neighborhood that would play, 2600 games, they were kind of, now people are a little more interested in playing outside. When I got that NES, all my friends and kids in the neighborhood, they suddenly all wanted to play NES. So I knew that it was going to be a big deal. There were some paths I didn't take. I was offered to be the editor for Atari Age back in the day, and also offered to be the editor of Nintendo Power. But I was, I was born and raised reading Consumer Reports, and so I really felt like there were these journalistic ethics that I couldn't really work for a company. So I turned them down. Also, on one trip to LA or to Las Vegas, I got sick and asthma and went down, the strip in an ambulance and spent days in a hospital, and I missed a meeting with Sid and Marty Croft, and I was told that they wanted to do a show about a kid and video games, and they had done, Land of the Lost and all these shows that I watched as a kid. My favorite was Sigma and the Sea Monsters, but also Lidsville is totally weird if you've ever had a chance to see it. Never heard from them again after missing that meeting. But for 10 years, every week, I would write a column and it would appear in a lot of newspapers. I wrote a lot of magazine articles. They tended to be more like in Women's Day and Family Circle, like women's magazines, family magazines. This one I think is in Omni, or maybe it's not. I don't know. A very consumer focused, and maybe because I read a lot of Irma Bombeck and was pen pals with George Burns, I found like a lot of my audience wasn't kids, it was parents and grandparents. So I wrote with that as sort of my audience in mind, because they would want to know about games and what games to get their kids and grandkids. So very short and consumer focused pieces, though I did some deeper reviews for some magazines. I'm reminded of it from time to time. Brett Weiss lived down the street from my mom, so I would see him every couple of years, and was on Antic, and there's a trading card with my name on it that I found on the internet while making this presentation a couple of days ago, and I saw this article that a radio station in El Paso wrote about me a couple of years ago. I didn't know about the article, and they didn't mention that I was born in El Paso. So sometimes I'm reminded of it. After all that, I went to Activision and worked on Pitfall: The Mayan Adventure. I felt like it was this great little bookend, that my first game that I worked on making was the first game that I got from Activision, was Pitfall. And it all of the, why is OJ in this picture? Because all of it, the Activision was just down the street from like where the OJ murders were, and all of this was taking place in the background while we worked day and night and lived at work trying to get this game done. I was a minder for the programmer. Programmer was from Scotland, and he lived or was staying for a spell in the in a apartment across the street, and I would bring him food and caffeine and throw discs up to his balcony, and he would throw them down, and I would make sure he was awake and working, and he would curse at me in Scottish. And that was my first video game. And here's the Gold Master candidate of Pitfall for the Sega Genesis, and that is my handwriting, because I would like burn the chips from files. And that's the team up at the top right. I'm from Texas and had all this asthma and a lot of health problems and all kinds of hurdles. And I know people say pull yourself up by your bootstraps, but I think that is false, and I'm not a subscriber to that belief. I think that we stand on shoulders of people, our parents. My mom certainly helped me through everything, and as an English teacher, helped me learn to write and read at a young age. My dad wouldn't buy me a game system, but kind of pointed the way to how I could do things on my own. Here's my family, my sister, who hated video games and called them biddy games and was very much not in favor of video games growing up. And we stand on like my grandfather, or after he passes away, the person I think I glommed onto to replace him, this nurse that helped me live Sir David Jack, who invented a lot of the asthma medicines, like albuterol, who would have saved my life thousands of times. Friends who helped me through difficult times and welcomed me on return. The editors of this is actually like the 1920 Compton Encyclopedia, but I couldn't find pictures of the 1962 encyclopedia. And Charles Schultz, who inspired me to be a comic strip artist, though it never was successful. Mr. Dick Tarpley, the editor of the Abilene Reporter News, who took my column, all of the people that I've met throughout all these years and continue to meet. This was taken an hour ago. Though I was just on his show once, he had Johnny Carson certainly had a whole career that made himself massively successful. And I have to recognize and be thankful for the fact that I benefit from being on his show. The guys from Nintendo, I think we also stand on our own shoulders, and we lift ourselves up, even when we stand on shoulders of people after they pass, and the people like our family. Some are in the audience, not the dog. And this was in a mirror in a restroom, in a restaurant once, and I took it, and it had been my iPhone picture for about 10 years, and it's my favorite reminder. We get one sort of shot and don't fuck it up. Any questions? Sorry, I'm basically out of time, but I am so glad that I was able to get through 80 slides in 45 minutes. Hello.
One quick comment and then a question.
Yes.
First of all, there is a clip on YouTube with Rawson being on the Johnny Carson show. Highly recommended. It's just awesome. It shows you how much adults didn't know about video games back then and how they were just looking for anybody, to tell them what this whole new thing is.
Yeah.
I thought that was amazing. So question for you, diving back into this past history, what's next? What are you going to do with all these unearthed things that... This was my first attempt at narrating it into a story. So I think I'm going to continue opening some of those boxes, and maybe I would, at dinners or parties, I would say a story and people would be like, you should write a book. And that just seems so daunting. But this was my first attempt, so maybe I go forward with that a little bit. I still make games, so we'll continue doing that. Yes?
Thank you for presenting this, sir. This is the most knockout, lovely story, and I've been watching panels all day, yesterday and today. That's all I've done. This is the most beautiful presentation I've seen here. I knew about the VidKit, but to really get the details, I'd love to read these columns.
Oh, yeah.
Are they online anywhere?
There's the occasional one online, but they are... and my mom bought most of the papers that we could find that they would be run in, and she cut them out, and so they're in those boxes. When I was a kid, we had to go to a news stand building and to buy newspapers from out of town and out of state, and it was the adult bookstore, and so it had to be out of town, and she had to go at weird hours so nobody would see her go in, and if I went, I had to hide in the back seat when she would come out with papers. And so I have a lot of newspaper copies, hard copies in boxes, and then all of the columns that I wrote on Commodore 64 are on floppies in Bing Street Writer. I don't know how to get them off, but...
Is there a thought that when you do this book you're considering you might reprint them?
Yeah. I think I own the copyright. don't know.
That's lovely. And the book that you mentioned that is from your childhood, that's a reprinting of columns.
Yeah, so when I first started, I did a couple coin op reviews and then was like, that's stupid, because my whole thing was it cost $30, $40 to buy a game. And so it's weird that there's movie reviews, because at the time a movie would cost $34 to go see a movie. It's no big, huge investment. And they would even review TV shows. And I'm like, what? That's free. So it was, I stopped doing consumer or coin op games, and I just did home games. And I tended to focus on there were so many games. I tended to focus more on doing reviews of games that I generally liked. So almost all of them were in some form positive. I did a report card style that was a nice little hook I did. So I would give things, A, B, B minus, graphics and gameplay and originality. I can't remember what my categories were, but it would have been collections of columns from 1982 to 83, late 83. It took a while to collate them all, and my mom and a friend of hers helped kind of edit it all together. And the first draft, I got accused of being sexist by the editors of Doubleday. So I had to rewrite a lot of things to be like, the player, he or her. My mom was particularly incensed by that, because she was like, I'm your editor.
So the book, you can find it on eBay.
I was going to say, I'm going to try to look for a copy.
Yeah, it's pretty rare. I saw one copy out on the show floor.
Whoa.
I think it's a standard kind of.
Yeah.
There weren't that many video game books in the early
No,
days, so,
no.
highly recommend it. It's a
I
fun
will
book.
look for one. One of your columns you showed us had a thing about your sister, and told all about your sister. You were talking about her, so.
Yes.
And her love for this certain game, so clearly you were very
Yeah.
explicit,
Yeah, she loved Barbie, and that was a game that I wouldn't have reviewed, but she played the heck out of that game. It was like the one game she really liked. And Smurfs, I think, for the ColecoVision, which was a good game. Yes?
How did you feel about the name change to Big Hit? Was it run by you, or they just said this is happening?
Yeah, I think mainly they said it was happening. I was against it, because I thought that I continued the column till I was a freshman in college, so it was a little weird being a vid kid, and I'm like 19. And I thought it sounded a little bit like, I don't know, cutesy, like Gary Coleman kind of thing. So I didn't love the name, but I mean, they were my syndication company, so. Yes?
I realize this is a very different time for the gaming industry, but do you have any advice for someone who's a relatively new game critic?
Game critic? Yeah. What would be I would say, understand audiences. That is often a big thing. Just being a game maker and then dealing with a lot of reviewers is, sometimes it seems like a reviewer is like upset that they're not reviewing the latest AAA game. And I'm like, I've made games for kids. And I'm like, this is for a kid, So think, and particularly Roger Ebert and Siskel and Ebert, they were really good at reviewing movies, even if it was like a kid's movie. They would know, they would review it with that perspective. So I would, a big thing that I think is often missed is perspective of the intended audience in a review. And just examples, and have a style. I was always, like I said, so much of my stuff was consumer report, so I had such a sense of fairness, and value for your money, and yet a little Irma Bombeck humor and stuff. That certainly influenced my style.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, guys, for coming. This was great.
Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe, and here are a few more videos for you to check out.